Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we are going to continue our study of the book of Ezra, and we are going to study chapter 8. Just to remind you, chapter 7, we learned of the support that Ezra received from the Persian king for his mission to bring more Jews back to the land of Israel. So they left Babylon and left the Persian Empire and traveled to Israel to join those who had already been in Israel. By this point, the Beit HaMikdash, the new temple, had already been standing for some 20 to 30 years or so, for a generation or two, and Jews had already returned for about 2 generations to the land of Israel, as we studied first by building the Mizbeach, the altar, and then eventually finally getting the support they needed to build the temple itself. So there's several generations of Jews living in the land of Israel. However, the bulk of the Jewish people still living in exile in various places in the Persian kingdom. Ezra decides to lead a group of people to go join the people in the land of Israel, and their encounter between the newly returning exiles and those that had already settled in the land is what the next 3 chapters is going to be devoted to. We finished chapter 7 by Ezra's special prayer of thanks to God for giving, securing the support of the king for his endeavor, for his trip, and for the king giving him what he needed to go in terms of money and political support and so on. So first, the beginning of chapter 8 is going to start off just listing names of families. I'll go through this quickly, that went along with Ezra. And the following is a list of the heads of the families that were traveling with Ezra and their yichus, meaning their genealogy, ha'olam imi, that came up with me. This is all being written in the first person by Ezra himself. The Malchut Artaxasta, during the reign of King Artaxerxes Hamelach Mibabel, the king from Babylon. We've variously referred to the Persian kings as the kings of Persia, the kings of Babylon, the kings of Assyria, and that's not coincidental. The Persian kings considered themselves the inheritors, the ones who they considered themselves the successors to the great Babylonian Empire that preceded them and the great Assyrian Empire that preceded that, all now subsumed into what was now the great Persian Empire. So, Mibnei Pinchas, of the sons descendant of Pinchas, that's Pinchas, the famous son of Aaron, of biblical fame. Gershom, he had a son, Gershom, Bnei Itamar, from the children of Itamar, another one of the sons of Aaron. Daniel, Bnei David, Chatush, from the sons of David, presumably King David. That would be Chatush, was a descendant of David. Bnei Shechania, Bnei Parosh, Zechariah, from the sons of Shechania, the sons of Parosh, was a man by the name of Zechariah. V'imo hityaches lizcharim me'ach hamishim, and with him there were approximately 150 men. Presumably we're not counting the women and children that came along with him, just the men that were considered the heads of those families. The Bnei Pachat Moav, so here we're not listing the entire group of people, we're just listing the families and their heads. The Bnei Pachat Moav, from the sons of Pachat Moav, El Yehoenai ben Zerachia v'imo Masayim Azcharim, he had 200 men with him. Bnei Shechania ben Yachaziel v'imo Shlosh Meot HaZacharim, there were 300 men. Bnei Adin Eved ben Yonasan, from the sons of Adin, and was a man named Eved ben Yonasan v'imo Chamishim HaZacharim, 50 men. Bnei Elam Yishaya ben Ataya v'imo Shivim HaZacharim, he had 70 men. Bnei Shefatia Zevadia ben Michael v'imo Shmonim HaZacharim. Bnei Yoav, from the children of Yoav, Ovadia ben Yechiel v'imo Masayim u'Shmonasar HaZacharim, 218 men. Bnei Shlomit ben Yosifia v'imo Me'ah v'Shishim HaZacharim, that's 160. Bnei Bevai, Zechariah ben Bevai v'imo Esrim u'Shmona HaZacharim, 28. Bnei Azgod, Yochanan ben Hakatan, Ve'imo me'avi asara zcharim, there was 120. Umibnei adoni kama charonim, and the ones taken up the rear in the last group was the children of Adoni Kam ve'elesh motam, and these were their names: Elifelet, Yeiel, Ushemaya, ve'imoim shishim azchorim, and they had a group of 60 men with them. And then Umibnei Bigvai, Utai ve'Zakor, ve'imo shivim azchorim, 70. Okay, so these are the names of the families that came along with Ezra initially. So they gathered together to get ready to set out in this big caravan to join their brethren in the Holy Land. The Ekbetzaim, the El HaNahar, and I gathered them all together at the river Haba El Ahava, the river that flows into a place called Ahava. This is Ahava, not the word Ahava in Hebrew, which means love. This is a Vav, not a Vet. So it's a different place somewhere in the Persian kingdom. And we camped there for 3 days, presumably getting their supplies ready, making sure they had their provisions ready for the road, etc. And I checked out. Avina means I studied the people that I had with me, right? And among the Kohanim, umibnei Levi lo matzasi sham. But there were no Levites. I had some Kohanim, some priests. I had some regular Jews, Judeans, but I couldn't find any Levites. So I needed to, I'm going to bring more people, and presumably we're going to help in the service in the temple in Jerusalem. We need Levites. So v'eshlocha lo Eliezer, la'Ariya, l'Shmaya, u'le'Elnason, u'le'Yariv, u'le'Elnason, u'le'Nason, u'le'Scharya, u'le'Mishulam Rashim. So I sent for this list of men who were Levites, heads of Levite families, Uli Yoyariv, Ula El-Nason, Mivinim, and to Yoyariv and El-Nason, who Mivinim literally means those that are understanding, presumably means they are educated, and they were able to teach and in the ways of the Levium. So I needed not just Levites, but I needed Levites who could teach the Levites how to do their jobs. So v'atzaveh osam al ido harosh, and I commanded them, I told them, regarding Ido, who was in charge of all of them, b'chasifya, in a place called Kasifya, Hamakom, the place, v'asima b'fihem dvarim, and I gave them the following message, right? L'daber el Ido achiv, to say to Ido, their brother, Hanesinim b'chasifya, that they should bring the Nisinim. Now, Nisinim before meant the Nitinim, the descendants of the Givonim from the days back in Joshua's days, who were the temple servants. Sometimes the word Nitinim is simply used as a generic term for temple servants. It doesn't refer specifically to the people that were genetically Nitinim or descendant of those families, which we did have some of those families mentioned before in the earlier return to Israel. But here it just means those that are temple servants, b'chasifya hamakom, that were present in this place called Kasifya. L'havi lanu misharsim, to bring along with them some servants for the house of God, right? Presumably that, based on the context, that could mean nitinim, bring along actual nitinim for the servants who did drawing water and gathering wood and so on, other supplies. But it could also be a reference to the Levium, the Levites, who were also servants in the house of God, who would be under the broad category of nitinim in the sense of being temple servants. And they brought that back to us. So in other words, we sent out to the Jews that presumably planned on sticking around and staying in exile. We said, we need more people for our group to be successful. Send us more people. So because God was generous to us, they did send us some more people. And they sent us Ish Sechel, a very smart man. A Sechel sometimes means successful, sometimes means smart. Here it more like means a skilled person, a person with a lot of skills, possibly a person with leadership skills. Mibnei Machli ben Levi ben Yisrael, who was from the family of Machli, who was one of the descendants of Levi, who was a son of Israel. V'Sheirevia, and not just him, but Sheirevia, Uvanav, and his sons, Ve'achav, and his brothers, Shmon Asher, for a total of 18 men. And more people also, V'et Chashavia, V'ito Yeshaya, Mibnei Merari. They also brought in some of the descendants of Merari, another one of the descendants of the Levite families, Echav, Uvneim, Esrim, another 20. So that refers to the Netinim in reference to the assistants in the temple that were Levites. But we also brought actual Netinim, Uminatinim, Shenasan David, V'hasarim Lavodas Halavim. And from the Netinim, which David, meaning King David, back in the day, right, had given them the job of assisting the Levites and working for the temple. Netinim Masayim Yasrim, we had 220 of those. Kulam Nikvu B'Shemos, they were all listed out by name. So at this point, so Ezra now has what he needs. He has temple servants, Netinim, he has Levites, he has priests, he has Judeans. So he has all the groups represented. He gathered together a group which, I didn't add the numbers, but if you were paying attention, not all that large, maybe a couple thousand at the most people to come along with Ezra to come to the temple, where, if you recall, there was some 42,000 plus people that had come 2 generations ago. Presumably over the last 2 generations, their population must have increased by some degree. So we may have been dealing with, I don't know, I'm just obviously guessing, 60, 70,000 people. And here you have a group of pilgrims, basically, or immigrants, a few thousand immigrants, led by Ezra, the great Torah scholar. When they're about to set off on their path, I'm up to verse 21, and there, after we gathered everyone together, and we spent several days getting our supplies together, I then declared a fast day, a day of prayer, lihitanot lifnei Eloheinu, to fast and to pray in front of our God, levakesh mimenu derech yeshara, to pray from Him that we have a straight path, meaning a straight, safe, successful journey to Israel, to the land of Israel. Lanu ulutapenu, for us and for our children that were coming along, uluchol rechushenu, and for all of the possessions and things that we were bringing along. Obviously, we need them for our own sustenance. We're also bringing supplies for the temple. We prayed that we should be successful. Now, I'm about to read verse 22, which, in my opinion, is one of the most remarkable and telling verses in this book, possibly in many books of Tanakh. And it really brings out the incredible difference between where the position of the Jews are now, as Ezra is leading a group of immigrants to the Holy Land under the thumb of the Persian Empire, and where they were when they came to set up the first temple many hundreds of years before that, and set up the first kingdoms and so on in the land of Israel and the first temple. And that is that we saw that this entire endeavor was only possible because it was blessed by and supported by the kings of Persia. There was no independent political leadership, only in the sense of appointed officials that were appointed and supported by the Persian government. It was acutely felt by Ezra, clearly acutely felt by Ezra and all other leaders of the time, including those that we studied before that came with the first group, Zerubbabel and Yoshua ben Yotzadak, and of course acutely felt by the people, that as much as they wanted to and dreamed about coming back to their land, reestablishing a new temple, establishing a new government and kingdom and independence, what actually happened was very, very different. What actually happened was they were still a very small, minuscule little province in the vast Persian Empire that was completely dependent on the Persian Empire for everything, including their very safety. And all of their wealth, all of their riches were completely dependent on the generosity of the Persian Empire, even though in many cases they were giving them back what was essentially their own vessels that were stolen 70 years before, or by now it's more than 70 years. But still, they only got it because the Persians decided to do so, not because, and And there's no grand miracles. There's no, splitting of the sea and 10 plagues and so on, and Mount Sinai revelations or anything great or grandiose occurring on this return. It's very, very humble. And very humble to the extent that Ezra was essentially just getting permission from the king and saying, we want to reestablish our temple because we want to pray for the safety of the kingdom. As we saw several times already, and we emphasized this and pointed it out, that the motivation of the kings of Persia was not because they were super generous and wonderful and they wanted to worship God, even though Cyrus might have said a few things that hinted to that. But when we analyzed his words, it became very clear that the intention of all of the Persian kings was simply because they wanted to shore up their empire, and they figured, what the heck, if these people put on a little mountain in this forsaken tiny little province called Judea, which is a mess anyway, and they set up their temple and pray for our good, maybe, who knows, maybe it'll help us out, maybe it'll help us win against our battles with the Greeks, who knows, right? Because by this time, the Greco-Persian wars had already begun, and the Persians were still a mighty, solid empire, but the Greeks were slowly making some serious inroads. Eventually, as we know, Alexander the Great, from a Greek a province of Macedonia, would eventually take down the entire Persian Empire, but we're not there yet. At this point, so that was their entire intent. But meanwhile, Ezra is talking about the great and wonderful power of God. So he says, Ki boshti, because I was embarrassed, Ezra said, Lish'ol min hamelech chaylu parashim, to ask from the king. When I was standing in front of the king, I asked for money, I asked for support, I asked for permission, I asked for all kinds of things, but I didn't ask for military protection for our caravan. I didn't ask for an army, I didn't ask for chariots, Azreinu me'oyev badarach, to protect us from enemies on the road. Even though we're traveling with all this gold and silver and money, we would be prime targets. None of us are experienced in fighting. None of us can protect ourselves. We're traveling with families, with women, with children, laden with, we're like a prime target for raiders and robbers and thieves along the way. I should have asked for a military escort, but Ezra said I was embarrassed. I couldn't. Ki amarnu lamelach lemar. That because we had told the king as follows: Yad Eloheinu al kol mivakshov letova. Our entire excuse, the way we sold our mission to the king, was by telling him that the people that search out our God and worship our God, that our God would do good for them. V'uzo v'apo, and his great strength and his great wrath would come down al kol ozvav, on anyone that forsakes God, anyone that leaves him. So, after giving the king the speech about this great and powerful and mighty God who can help the Persian Empire, which is why you should let us, I felt ashamed, even though I knew in my heart that I wanted to ask for protection. I couldn't, because it was embarrassing. So I had to rely on God alone. The power of this image, the incredible, the helplessness on the part of Ezra, knowing that I should have asked for protection, but I couldn't ask for protection. So now I have to rely on God. This is fascinating. Whether to look at this as a strength or a weakness, it's something I think you should think about. It's hard for me to put my finger on it, but it's a very strong, a very powerful sentence there. So what did I do? I declared a fast and prayer because I had already done everything I could within my power to secure protection. And one gets the feeling that Ezra felt when he was standing in front of the king that had he asked for protection, the king would have laughed him out the door, and this entire endeavor never would have gotten off its feet in the first place. And Ezra then had to make the decision, do we go and rely on God for protection, or do we just give up the whole thing? And he decided to go and rely on God. So Vanatsuma, this is verse 23, so we fasted, Vanevaksham Eloheinu al zos, and we begged God regarding this, Vaye'oter lanu, and God listened to us, he listened to our prayers, and he gave us a safe journey to the land of Judea, the land of Israel. I do want to point out one more thing from verse 22 that I just read. There's a theme here that's going to be very important in our understanding of the next two chapters, 9 and 10. And Ezra refers to those that leave God as kol ozivav, those that forsake him, those that leave him. Meaning, and what he refers to the ones that are faithful to God as the mivakshav, the one who search him, meaning the ones who go towards him. I'm pointing this out now. The significance of it I'm going to emphasize in later in the next podcast and the one after that when we study chapters 9 and 10. But just bear that in mind, because there's many ways that one can refer to those that seek God and those that leave God, right? But he specifically chooses forsaking him, almost like God is over there and I'm leaving, I'm going away, I'm separating myself and leaving him. And mivakshav is searching him, meaning constantly trying to get close to him. So it's this physical and spiritual closeness to God, which is what God wants, and this physical and spiritual separation from God, which is what God does not want. So then, va'avdilah, verse 24, misorei hakohanim shnei masar, I separated out, I chose 12 of the heads of the Kohen families, of the priestly families, l'sherevya, chashavya, v'imoim me'achem asara. The two of the heads were Sherevya and Chashavya, and 10 other as heads for the Kohen and for the priests. V'eshkololohem, and I counted out for them and divided out for them as hakesef, as azov, as hakelim, all of the silver and the gold and the vessels, through my space Eloheinu, all of which had been set aside for donations to the house of God, to the temple. Ha'herimu hamelach v'yoatzav v'sorav v'chol Yisrael animsim. Those which the king himself had donated, the king's advisors and officers had donated, and all of the Israelites who stayed and remained in Persia but donated to the temple. I took all of that silver, v'eshkelal yadam kesef, and I gave to them for them to be in charge of and to watch over the following amounts: kesef kikarim sheish mios v'chamishim, 650 kikarim, talents of silver, uchlei kesef mea l'chikarim, and as weighed in talents, 100 talents of silver vessels, zohav mea kikar, and of gold 100 talents. Ukifore zohav esrim, and 20 golden bowls, la'adarchonim elef, that were worth 1,000 adarchonim, which is a coin, a Persian coin. Uchlei nechoshes, and when it comes to bronze, mutzav, very shiny bronze. If you remember, we mentioned this several times in Zechariah. We talked about the significance of the shining bronze. Here it calls them the shining bronze. Tova, that was good quality shining bronze. Shnayim chamudos kazav, that were as precious as gold because of how shiny and how good quality they were. 2 such bowls. V'omra alehem, and I told the priests, Atem kodesh la'Adonai, you are holy to God. V'hakelim kodesh, and these vessels are holy to God. V'hakesef v'hazav nidava la'Adonai Eloi avosechem, and the gold and the silver is a donation, is an offering to God, the Lord, who is the God of your forefathers. Shiktu v'shimru, be very careful and guard this. Al tishkolu lifnei sarei hakohanim v'alavim sarei avos Yisrael b'Yerushalayim. I'm sorry, ad tishkelu. I apologize, I read that wrong. Until you can bring it, so be careful with it. Watch it. Don't show it off to your friends. Don't show it off and take it out. Leave it in a safe. Secure it. Watch it and take it with you to the Holy Land until you can give it to the Kohanim, the priests and the Levites and the heads of the families of the Israelites that are currently in Jerusalem, Halishkot Beit Adonai, that are in charge of the Lishkot, meaning the rooms or the chambers where these things are stored in the house of God. The Kiblu HaKohanim V'Alavim Mishkal HaKesef Yazav V'Hakelim, the priests and the Levites took all of this weight in silver and gold and vessels to bring to Jerusalem, to the house of our God. Remember, this is still Ezra speaking in first person. So we traveled from the river Ahava b'shnei masar lachodesh harishon, on the 12th day of the first month of Nisan. This is just prior to the holiday of Passover, so they must have spent Passover on the road. Lalachet Yerushalayim, to head on our journey towards Jerusalem. V'yad Eloheinu hayta aleinu, and the hand of God was with us, and He protected us. He saved us from any enemies and any ambushers that tried to start up with us on the road. God protected us. And we eventually arrived in Jerusalem, and we stayed in Jerusalem for 3 days just to settle down and rest from the trip before we conducted any business. So and on the 4th day, we brought in and they measured out and weighed the gold and silver and vessels in the house of our God, al yad Miremos ben Uriah HaKohen. It was done by Miremot, who was the son of Uriah the Kohen, V'imo Elazar ben Pinchas, and with him was Elazar, the son of Pinchas, V'imoim Yozavad ben Yeshua. Presumably Yozavad ben Yeshua is the son of Yoshua ben Yoshaphat, who ben Yotzarak, who we learned about before, the prior high priest, and his son was now. This is several, this is 20 to 40 years later, so it's his son is now there. V'Noadya ben Binui Halavim, and a man named Noadya ben Binui who was from the Levites. So they measured it out, and they took the donations, b'mispar, b'mishkal hakol, and everything was exactly according to number and count. Presumably, this is demonstrating the honesty, both the honesty of the people that were put in charge of watching it, and also the fact that God had protected it so that nobody had attacked and stolen anything along the way. Vayikasev kol hamishkal b'Yisai, and the entire amount that was brought in the donations was written down and recorded at that time. Haboim mehashevi v'nei hagola, the people that had now come back from the captivity, the ones that had just returned with me from the exile, hikrivu olot lelohei Yisrael, they brought sacrifices, burnt sacrifices to the God of Israel. Parim shnei masar, they brought 12 oxen. Al kol Yisrael, representing all of the tribes of Israel. Again, we see this, and we saw this before, that they still saw themselves as the successors to all the 12 tribes of Israel, even though, for the most part, the 10 northern tribes had long disappeared from the world stage at this time. Al kol Yisrael, Elim Tishim v'Shisha, they brought 96 rams, Kvasim Shivim v'Shiva, 77 sheep, Tzvir Echatos Shnei Masar, and another 12 sin offerings, presumably to bring forgiveness on all of Israel. Hakol Ola L'Adonai, all of it was brought as a burnt offering to God. Vayitnu et Tasei Hamalach le'Achashtar Panei Hamalach, and of course there were Persian officers, Persian princes that monitored and were the governors of the area of this province of Judea. So they gave all of the laws and decrees that the king had made to them to demonstrate that this was a group of people supported, and this mission was supported by the king. Upachavot Ever Hanar, and to the governors of this entire region of over the river, meaning the people from beyond the Euphrates River, meaning this entire region, which includes Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, etc. V'nis'u esa'am v'es beis Elohim, and they gave support to the nation and the house of God, because, of course, this is what they were instructed by their superiors to do. So Ezra has arrived, the people have arrived, they've come to the temple, they've brought their donations to the temple as planned, they've served in the temple, brought sacrifices to the temple, and then we're going to start to see how this new arrival, this great Torah scholar, the Torah leader Ezra, who's coming to the holy house of God, but he's coming from far away, shows up at the house of God, what he finds, what he doesn't like, and what kind of trouble he's about to start making for the locals, for the people who are now locals for about 2 generations. Thank you so much for studying chapter 8 together. Looking forward to studying chapters 9 and 10. Have a wonderful day.